Home Guard Odin lay buried in the rock beneath the Atlantic, an invisible citadel of steel and diamond glass and cooling towers that breathed faint heat into the deep. From orbit, it was nothing at all, only a patch of ocean where cargo routes kinkaked a little wider than they needed to. Envoy Selkin hated it on sight. To the Valyri conflux, worlds were supposed to show themselves. Spires of luminous coral, drifting arches, cities that sang into the upper air. Earth's command center hit instead, as if daring the galaxy to find it. Selkin's transport descended through storm clouds and humid air, skimming the waves before plunging into an armored shaft that irised open just long enough to admit it. Water boiled off its shielding skin, cascading in ghostly sheets. Then the ocean vanished, and the transport fell into dry, reinforced dark. She watched the human technicians through the curved window of her compartment. They moved with that same unnerving quickness she had seen in every human station and outpost since her posting. The restless motion of a species that had discovered the stars late and was trying to make up for the lost time all at once. The dock sealed behind them. Grab plating groaned as it adjusted, mimicking planetary pull for Valyri comfort. When the hatch opened, warm air rushed in, carrying the sharp smell of machine coolant and brewed coffee. Admiral Tark had waited at the end of the gangway. He was taller than Selkin expected, shoulders square in a dark uniform that valued function over decoration. His eyes were focused, not hostile, reading her expression, her angle of approach, how she held the relay case that contained the reason she was here. There was a faint silver thread along his jaw, where an old wound had knitted badly in low gravity. To Selkin, who came from a culture where bodies were cultivated as art, he looked like a piece of weapons-grade sculpture, plain lines refined only by impact. Envoy Selkin. His voice carried easily over the clatter of the dock. "You brought it?" She lifted the relay case, its surface shimmering with a Valyrian encryption sheen. "I brought it. You will wish I hadn't." He did not flinch. "Then let's get it opened." They walked together through the armored corridor into Home Guard Odin's core. A spherical room studded with hollow windows and sensor rigs. The walls showed live feeds from across the system. The shining curve of Earth's limb, the pitted shadow of the moon, the glittering scaffolds of orbital yards. Men and women in uniform moved among the consoles, glancing up when Selkin passed. At the center of it all rose a table formed from light and data, a volumetric map of the solar system. The outer system glowed with dozens of tagged symbols, defense pickets, mining colonies, old survey craft. Beyond those, at the rim of human habitation, a scatter of red icons crawled inward like embers drifting through cold space. Karathi signatures. Selin set the relay case on the console and keyed in her personal pattern. It unfolded with a soft hiss, strips of quasi-crystal separating to reveal a shimmering core. The room dimmed automatically. Everyone turned. The hollow that rose from the core was stark and simple. A single colossal vessel, its scale indicated by a tiny sphere labeled Terran Homeworld off to the side. The Cathy World Lance. A murmur went through the room. Tar did not join in. He studied the projection, brows drawing down slightly. Beside him, general staffers and analysts exchanged grim looks. One, a woman with a scarred scalp, whispered, "So, it's real." Selene flicked her fingers through the input field. The projection shifted, now showing the World Lance's primary weapon, an immense spine of interlaced rings and focusing arrays stretching along the ship's center line. Data tags clustered around it like flies, recorded energy output from prior engagements, extrapolated damage estimates. The weapon is called the Starfall Scythe. Selene said it has been used 3 times in recorded history. Each use resulted in total biosphere sterilization within 1 planetary rotation. Surface flash, mantle disruption, collapse of magnetic field. Human terms she had learned were very blunt. Even so, she saw several faces tighten. 3 worlds, TK said. 3 out in the conflux volume, 2 in conflux space, 1 in a neutral cluster. Sulkin did not add that Valyri doctrine had explicitly forbidden ever provoking the Imperium to that level again. We do not have sufficient high-resolution data to model a direct hit on Earth. We do have enough to know your current defense grids are meaningless against it. Tar's fingertips brushed the edge of the holographic world lance. It refracted around his hand, pixels scattering. What was the trigger for its use? Sulkin touched another control. Data scrolled. Negotiation transcripts, casualty charts, Imperium doctrine excerpts. In each case, local species achieved a technological asymmetry that frightened the Karathi leadership, a capacity for uncontrolled escalation. They call it strategic singularity. They perceive your species in similar terms. And so they brought their hammer, TK said softly, because they are afraid. The Imperium does not frame it as fear, Selkin said. They frame it as prophylactic stability. Remove the variable before the equation explodes. Around them, the hollow is updated in real time, plotting the world lance's trajectory. It hung beyond the rim of the map, outside immediate sensor reach, but its vector was clear enough. It would enter the outer system within days. I assume you did not come only to tell us to prepare our memorials, T said. No. Sulkin hesitated. This next part would either be the spark of an alliance, or the point at which humans decided the Valyri were cowards. We came because you are not like the others. He blinked, the first genuine surprise she had seen. We have watched you, she continued. You take any technology and twist it. Use it in ways that defy our predictive models that even your own people cannot fully anticipate. You break patterns that older powers rely on. The Imperium cannot tolerate that in a neighbor. And the conflux? He asked. Selene exhaled slowly. We do not know whether to be terrified or impressed, but we concluded one thing. If any young species might deform the path of the world, Lance, it is yours. Our own attempts in the past have failed. There was a long moment of silence. Tar straightened. Then we had better justify your trip. He looked past her beyond the hollow, through a different world of data displayed only in his internal feed. He saw the buried labs on the moon, the half-built ring of experimental mirrors around Earth. The classified files marked with a simple name, Project Janus. Get me Tau Deepworks, he said. Priority 1, and someone fetched Dr. Abacu out of whatever hole she's hiding in. The order rippled outward, carrying with it the first vibration of a decision that had been gestating for years. That if the galaxy insisted on treating humans as a threat, then humans would learn to be a threat in ways no one expected. Far above the Atlantic, unseen by anyone on the surface, one thin arc of the astrellisum glinted faintly in the sunlight. A single curve of metal and shimmering cesium, quietly waiting to become the strangest weapon Earth had ever fielded. Dr. Melina Beckway had never intended to be responsible for defending a planet. Her dreams as a child had involved numbers, not armies, perfect lattices of math, crystalline proofs. On the moon, in the hollowed-out basalt under Tau's rim, she had found a way to live inside those numbers. Tau Deepworks had been built for heavy industry and deep drilling. Under her guidance, a warren of its caverns had become home to something else entirely. In one of those caverns, as dust motes drifted in weak lunar gravity and vacuum-rated machinery hummed away behind glass, Mean stood between two very different artifacts. On one side, a block of cesium, the size of a suitcase and the color of oil on water. Its surface did not reflect light so much as edited, smearing reflections into strange, shifting geometries. It had taken 10 years of careful trial and error to grow a piece that big without it tearing itself apart. On the other, a squat cylinder of dark alloy ringed with superconductive loops and flux coils, the Hadrian flux drive. In normal times, it would have been attached to a test craft, its field pushed to the edge of stability in a controlled environment. If times were normal, there would be no need to spin time itself like a coin. Doctor. The voice came from behind her, light, urgent. Mean turned. Amita Bhaskar skidded to a halt just inside the airlock. Mag boots scraping slightly. Her hair floated in the low gravity, tied back with a strip of Valeri polymer that caught the overhead light in faint colors. "You heard?" Mi said it was not a question. She could see the news in Amita's eyes. Wide pupils, two bright edges. Amita nodded. "Homeg Guard Odin is on line 4. Admiral Haddad wants you in the loop." "Of course he does," Min murmured. She looked back at the cesium block, the Hadrian cylinder. "Tell them I'm here." Min walked with Amita down the cavern corridor, past thick glass panels behind which engineers in pressure suits moved between vats and fabrication rigs. Cesium sloshed in one vat like thick mercury, forming and unforming crystalline ridges under precisely tuned electromagnetic fields. Amita stole glances through each window. She still felt the same fierce childlike thrill every time she saw the alien material reacting to their equations. When she had first seen the auric reliquary, perched like a frozen insect nest in the ice fields far beyond Neptune, she had known her life would be divided into before and after. The auric reliquary was older than human civilization, older than humanity's first stone tools. When the survey drones had cracked its hull and sent back the first images, older species had screamed for the site to be quarantined, for humans not to touch. Humans naturally had touched. From its humming cores, they had pulled fragments of data, holographic maps, half-corrupted schematics, traces of a language that was more like music than text. In those fragments, Min had found hints of Chium, an exotic metamaterial that twisted not just light, but the phases of fields passing through it. Amita had turned those hints into equations, imperfect, incomplete, but enough to begin making maze shards in lunar gravity. Enough to imagine what a ring of such material might do to a coherent energy beam. They reached the control room at the heart of Tau Deep Works. It was a tight space by human standards. Every surface is filled with displays or instruments. A window looked out on the moon's surface where a fine powder of gray dust and black shadows stretched under the harsh sunlight. The largest screen already showed Admiral Tar Haddad, shoulders rigid, Home Guard Odin's stark control sphere behind him. Beside him, slightly off-center, stood Envoy Selkin, Valeri features composed and too still. "Dr. Abaku," Tar said, "I'm hoping you will tell me we built the Halarum for a reason." "Incomplete reasons," Min said, dropping into her chair. Amita slid into the next seat, hands already flying across her console to pull up models, toric fragments, cesium growth logs. "But yes, we have a plan. You're not going to like it." TK's mouth quirked. "I'm surrounded by people telling me things I don't like. It's how I know we're being honest." Min switched the main display to a model of the Astros Halarum, a thin ring around Earth's orbit, segments glowing in different colors. Some pulsed with solid green representing finished cesium mirrors. Others flickered amber or red. Incomplete, unstable, not yet installed. "The Halarum was never meant to be a shield," Min said. "At least not in the sense you're used to. It's a phase structure, a gate, if you like. It doesn't block energy. It catches it and hands it off to the next piece." "Like a waveguide," Amita added when she saw Tar's blank look. "Imagine you pour water into the top of a spiral slide. The slide isn't stopping the water. It's taking its motion and bending the path. Only the water is a continent cutting beam," Min said, "and the slide is made of a substance we barely understand, based on hints from a civilization that is gone." "Encouraging," Trick murmured. "And this slide ends where?" "Exactly where we point it." Min said anywhere on the sphere aligned with Earth's orbital plane or beyond if we get clever with gravitic lensing. Envoy Sulson's eyes flicked from Min to the model. "You intend to receive the Imperium's main weapon and send it somewhere else." "That's the plan," Min said. "Can your ring withstand the initial contact?" Sulkin asked. "The Starfall Scythe is not a beam like those your fleets use. It carries phased exotic components we still do not have names for. It oscillates along dimensions your Kium has never experienced." "We anticipated that," Amita said quickly. Kium can respond dynamically. The auric fragments talk about learning pulses using the first contact of a new energy type to refine the material structure in real time. Think of it as a mirror that teaches itself what kind of light it is, seeing as the light hits it. Min spared her a sideways glance. That was what they did. We have an approximation. There is a catch, Amita admitted, fingers dancing over her console. A new image joined the model. A waveform, complex and shifting. Learning takes time. The scythe's full pulse is long by weapon standards, but we're still talking seconds. We have to let part of it through unshaped, so the medium can lock onto the structure. If we block it early with conventional means, we lose the chance to tune. If we try to guess, we will guess wrong. TK stared at the waveform, counting not peaks and valleys, but lives in cities. How much has to get through? He asked quietly. Min hesitated. This was the point she had dreaded. If our models are even close, she said, we need the leading edge of the pulse to touch the upper atmosphere enough to excite the magnetosphere, ionize the outer layers. We have satellites seeded with maximum samplers at critical nodes. They will feed the live data into Tau in real time. Amita's team will fit that into the auric-derived models and broadcast a returning pattern to the Hauram segments. And those segments, how fast can they adapt? Trick asked. If we only had the speed of light to work with, Amita said, gesturing helplessly. Too slow. The returning signal would chase the pulse and never catch up. But we have something else. Her hands swept to the schematic of the Hadrian flux drive. TK's eyes narrowed. That drive is an experimental unit. It is not rated for what we need. Min finished. Yes, I know. But it can generate a localized temporal shear. The Arabic texts reference something similar. If we activate it in sync with the learning pulse, we can stretch the proper time along the Halim's path. Sulkin tilted her head. Temporal manipulation. That is conflux forbidden research. We didn't ask your permission, Min said more sharply than she intended. Then, catching her breath, we're not talking about loops or paradoxes, just slowing things down in the reference frame of the ring so the returning signal can outrun the incoming field. You want to delay reality, Sulkin murmured, in a specific circle around your world. Yes, Amita said simply, for just long enough to teach the mirror what it is seeing. And if you fail, TK said, Earth takes the full blast. Mental disruption, magnetic collapse, the works. If we do nothing, Min said, Earth takes the full blast anyway. He nodded once. He had known that already. Hearing it framed this way merely fixed the choice into language. Show me the failure modes, he said. They did. He watched as simulations played out. The beam striking an untuned helirim and punching through in chunks, carving fire lanes across oceans. The Hadrian drive misfired, tearing the ring apart. Caseum panels shattering and scattering sharp, deadly fragments into low orbit. He watched the one successful run. The beam caught. Its coherence rolled along the ring and spat out into deep space. Its path curved to strike the world lance dead center. He knew enough of math and war to understand that the successful run depended on factors they could not guarantee. The exact signature of the starfall scythe, the precision of medium manufacturing, the reliability of human reaction under catastrophic stress. We're betting the planet on this, one of the staffers muttered. TK folded his hands. We've already lost if we fight them on their terms. This at least is a game they do not expect. He looked at me, at Amita, at the silent, half-lit mass of the flux drive behind them. Do it, he said. Bring the Howlerim online. Feed whatever you need from the home guard, and I want outer system defenses to buy us every extra second they can. Put Romandula on the edge and tell him to make the Imperium uncomfortable. He cut the line. For a moment, the hum of Tycho's systems was the only sound. Min sat back, feeling the weight of what she had just agreed to settle around her shoulders like a very cold cloak. Amita leaned forward, eyes damp but burning. We can do this. You believe that? Mean. Yes. Amita swallowed. Because no one else would even try. And because if the Auric did it, and some of them survived long enough to write warnings, then it's possible. We just have to make the right kind of mistake. Mean stared at her. The right kind of mistake? He thought that perhaps it was humanity in 4 words. All right, she said. Let's show the galaxy what happens when you aim a sun at us. Commander Roman Dala watched the outer system recede in the tactical hollow and tasted metal on his tongue. The driftwood palisade had never been meant to hold. It had been a layer of early warning and harassment, a picket line of stations and patrol craft standing sentinel at the hazy boundary where civilization faded into cometary gloom. Now it was a place to die loudly and with purpose. Karathi Vanguard crossed the 30 AU mark. His sensor chief said multiple destroyer and cruiser signatures. The World Lance still masked behind their formation, but its gravitational wake is impressive. Roman nodded. He floated in the command frame of the patrol carrier Vuvius. Mag boots hugging the graded deck, hands resting lightly on the haptic surfaces of his station. Around him, his bridge crew were a patchwork of uniforms and call signs, Navy regulars, volunteers from independent haulers, even a few miners who refused to abandon their rigs. The hollow before him showed the system stretched out like a dish, the distant sun a bright point, inner planets arranged in delicate orbits, the scatter of defense satellites and stations making a faint halo around Earth's track. At the outer edge glittered the palisade, his domain. He keyed a tight beam to Earth. Admiral Haddad's face appeared slightly grainy with the latency of distance. We've seen the first wave, Roman said. Timet matches Sulkin's projections. TK's jaw worked once. You understand your mission parameters. Delay, confuse, frustrate, Roman said. Bleed them just enough that they overcommit. Make them angry. Make them arrogant. Casualty projections are high, TK said. Roman smiled without humor. I read the same reports. We'll make it count, sir. TK hesitated, then nodded. I won't insult you with speeches, Commander. Do what you came here to do. The link cut. Roman exhaled slowly. He had been on the other side of command once, a younger officer sitting where his tactical chief now sat, stunned by the casualty numbers some distant admiral had just accepted. Today, he understood. You did not choose battles like this. You discovered that someone else had chosen them for you, and then you decided how much of your own pattern you could impose on their script. Signal all units, he said. Initiate Harrier protocol. The order rippled through the palisade. Out among the ice and rocks, ancient survey ships came alive, waking from museum status and power-saving hibernation. Mining sleds detached from their parent stations, their holds packed not with ore, but with repurposed reactor cores and compressed fuel. Autonomous platforms, unspooled sensor nets, and beam emitters. Nodes in a distributed nervous system designed to give the Karathi the worst migraine the outer system had ever seen. Roman's own carrier swung gently, reorienting its bow toward the incoming red icons. On the Corinth side, Arch-Strategos Vexar observed the unfolding human dispositions with professional detachment. The holographic map before him floated in the cool, violet-lit command pit of the World Lance's flag bridge. Tendrils of data flowing between his couch and the surrounding systems. Humans, he had long since decided, were a fascinating mistake. You could not call them primitive. They had taken simple tools and in a handful of centuries built starships and beam arrays and fragile little outposts around far worlds. They were clever, enthusiastic, and disastrously risk-tolerant. They were also, by all the Imperium's long-tested metrics, unstable. Give them a weapon, and they would not only use it, they would try to improve it in ways none of your models anticipated. Give them access to your communications bands, and they would flood them with noise and questions and songs, some of which contained deadly patterns. Allow them to spread unbounded, and they would turn every border into a question mark. The Imperium did not care for question marks. Local defense assets are vectoring to intercept, his operations sub-commander said. They appear to be deploying in disarray. Disarray is camouflage, Vexar said. His mandibular plates clicked softly. They will have a structure within it. Show me their pathing. The holo zoomed in. Human ships and platforms darted among asteroid shadows like insects. Their trajectories looped and crisscrossed in ways that made Karathi mathematics ache. They are seeding mines and decoy nodes, a tactical analyst said. Detonations along probable approach vectors, harassment pattern. Standard for them. Vexar flexed his peripheral limbs. Let them have their fun. We are not here to win an honorable battle. We are here to extinguish a set of coordinates. Commit screening flotillas Beta through Delta to clear a path. Order them to stay beyond 5 light seconds of any human formation. No close engagements. He watched as Karathi destroyers and cruisers advanced, their drives burning cold and clean. Human minds blossomed in their path. Chain reactions of kinetic shrapnel and directed energy. The destroyer took a hit, losing a third of its mass to a spray of needle-thin fragments. A cruiser's shields overloaded under a barrage of self-destructing drones. Vexar felt a distant twitch of irritation. Casualty ratio is already within acceptable parameters. The operations subcommander said we will reach transmission range for the ultimatum within 30 hours. We will not send an ultimatum. Vexar said it is an obsolete doctrine in this case. The subcommander's frills pulsed in confusion. Archstrategos. We know this species. Vexar said they do not surrender when a stronger power demands it. They sing songs. They paint slogans. They fight with whatever they have left. Sending the formal demand will waste time and give them a narrative. He tapped a limb claw against the arm of his couch, bringing up archive footage. Humans standing in ragged lines, shouting defiance at occupying troops. Human captains grinning into calm pickups as their ships burned. You do not bargain with a strategic singularity, Vexar said. You exercise it. We will demonstrate that any path of resistance leads to immediate annihilation. He tasted the word annihilation with grim satisfaction. On the human side of the battle space, Roman's carrier shook as another wave of Karathi fire lanced through the improvised barricades. Loss of pickets, 9 through 16, the sensor chief reported. Karathi losses are negligible. They're hanging back, Roman muttered, keeping their distance. They don't want to give us any openings. Then we make them, his tactical officer said quietly. Roman flashed him a tight smile. Exactly. He keyed an internal channel. All units implement pattern cross-current. You know your parts. Pattern cross-current was not in any fleet manual. It had emerged from late-night sessions with miners and tug captains and board frigate crews sketched on mess tables and chalk and coffee spills. It was not designed to win. It was designed to break expectations. Across the palisade, human ships began to die on purpose. A freighter modified as a missile barge simply turned its drives toward a Karathi cruiser and burned hard, ignoring return fire until both ships collided. The freighter's overcharged reactors went critical in a white-hot flare. A cluster of mining barges moved into a dense ice cluster, broadcast an apparent panic signal, then simultaneously vented their fuel, setting off a localized fog. When Karathi destroyers swept sensors through the haze, the returns were nonsense. The destroyers fired blind, hitting each other as often as the humans. Drone swarms moved as if they had pilots veering unpredictably, singing in unprotected bands, broadcasting fragments of schmaltzy human love songs and old comedy routines. Karathi gunners wasted shots on them, trying to silence the noise. A fuel depot, long emptied and deliberately left in the Kathi path, detonated with no warning, its interior lined with shaped charges that spat dense slugs into the enemy formation. The depot itself had been broadcasting calm, normal telemetry until the last possible moment. Why would they do that? Vexar's analyst asked aloud, staring at a replay. There was no tactical gain. There was a marginal delay, another replied. Marginal? They expended a major asset. Vexar floated on his couch, watching pattern after pattern. You are making a category error. You are assuming they still think in terms of assets. The analyst turned her frills. What else is there? Narrative, Bixar said. They are trying to write something into our predictive models. Each irrational loss teaches our systems that future behavior is more stochastic than it truly is. They are deliberately corroding our ability to forecast. He ran a quick simulation. Sure enough, the tactical net's confidence margins were eroding faster than casualty ratios alone would justify. How do we compensate? The operations subcommander asked. We do not, Vexar said. We refuse their premise. We do not seek to win efficiently. We seek to end the conversation. He felt something like disgust tinged with admiration. The humans were good at this. They could not hope to win toe-to-toe, so they lunged sideways and bit at the ankles of his models. Very well. Signal the World Lance's primaries, he said. Begin pre-charge of the scythe. Stand by for a firing solution. Once we have a clear line of sight to the home world, we will cut out the problem at its root. The order pulsed through the superstructure of the flagship. Deep within the worldlands, rings larger than mountain ranges began to stir. Superconductive coils howled as they spun up. Exotic condensates flowed through narrow plumbing, chill and dense and ready to become the spine of an energy pulse unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Far away in lunar basalt, the Hadrian flux drive slumbered, waiting for a signal that would break it in history. Both Diego Salvatier had discovered that space held its own versions of burning buildings. He dangled 200 meters from an unfinished segment of the Estrella's halorim, tether lines taut, the metal arc beneath his boots shivering with the tiny oscillations of thermal expansion and distant impacts. The planet rolled beneath him in a sweep of cloud and ocean, blue and white and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Above him, the rest of the ring extended out of sight, a skeletal circle of girders and half-installed panels. Some segments gleamed with the weird sheen of Kessium, catching sunlight and shredding it into sprays of color. Others were just scaffolds waiting to be skinned. His suit pinged him for the third time. Svatiera, came the voice of his foreman over the local loop. Your assigned sector is done. You can come in. Diego planted his mag boots more firmly and keyed his mic. There's a misalignment on the E12 interface. We can tune that from control. The foreman said. Get your ass inside. Diego glanced along the curve. At the junction labeled E12, a cesium panel sat with a gap just visible between its edge and the coupling. Nothing by Earth standards. A human could step over it without noticing. But Xium was not steel. It'll introduce noise through the segment, Diego said. We're hanging our lives on coherent behavior. I'll weld it, solvent clean, and reset the brackets. 10 minutes. The foreman swore in rapid Portuguese. We don't have 10 minutes. You've seen the feed. They're almost to the line. I saw, Diego said quietly. He had watched between tasks as the outer system feed streamed in, ships going dark, chunks of ice turning into expanding vapor. He had watched Roman Dulca's patchwork flotilla fight like starving dogs snapping at the ankles of a god. He had seen one little mining barge, its pilot signing off with a joke before ramming into a Karathi cruiser and disappearing in a light brighter than sunrise. Diego set his jaw. We don't know which segment is going to take the hit, but I know this one is wrong. 10 minutes. A pause. His foreman knew him well enough to hear the iron there. Fine, you get 7. After that, I drag you in by your tether. Diego grinned, despite himself. Copy that. He anchored a temporary clamp, released the edge of the cesium panel. It moved slowly under his gloved hands, heavy even in low gravity. Up close, its surface did strange things to the reflection of Earth. Continents warped and flowed around invisible seams. He remembered the first time he had seen Cassium on a small test rig at Tau, part of a tour that had been his reward for not dying during an orbital firefight. He reached out, brushed a knuckle along its surface, and watched the reflection of his hand branch into 3, then fold back into 1. He had joked then that if this stuff ever went into firefighting gear, fires wouldn't know which way was up. Now the fire was a weapon aimed at his home. His suit chimed again. this time with a different tone. Priority broadcast. He tapped the accept key with his chin. Admiral Haddad's voice filled his ears, crisp even through the static of the network. This is Home Guard online to all orbital workers. Trick said, "You've all seen the outer system feeds. You know it's coming, I won't lie to you. Our defense plan requires that we let the enemy fire once." A murmur rippled through the open channel. Foremen, engineers, tug pilots, all listening. "We will use that opening pulse to learn how their weapon works," Tara continued. "Dr. Abbott's team will ride the leading edge and retune the Howrim underneath you in real time. You're going to feel things that aren't in any manual. You're going to see segments fail. Some of you may die where you stand." Diego's hands stilled for a heartbeat. He thought of his father standing at the door of their apartment in Quito when Diego had left for low-orbit construction. "You spent your life running into places people are running out of." His father had said, "Now you're doing it with more vacuum. Try not to make your mother cry more than necessary." He smiled tightly and kept working. "We are not asking you to be soldiers," TK said. "You're already beyond what we could ask. But if you get the chance to fix a panel, to anchor a bracket, to keep a segment coherent for even a fraction longer, take it. Every heartbeat we can hold that pattern is another heartbeat the beam spends going somewhere else." He paused, then added, voice softer, "You are the last thing between that weapon and the people under your feet, and I have seen what people like you can do when the world is on fire." The channel clicked off. Diego set the medium edge down gently, feeling the subtle flex as its internal structure responded to the tiny change in stress. He knelt, mag boot sticking, and brought his welding arm around, checking seals. 4 minutes, his foreman said in his ear. "They're in position to fire. Get it done." Diego exhaled and lit his torch. Above him, unseen, the first delicate threads of the Starfall scythe's pre-charge brushed the long-range sensors in Earth orbit. Systems across the Howrim shivered awake, status lights flickering from amber to green to red as subsystems checked themselves. Complained, accepted override commands deep inside Tau Deepworks. Alarms chimed. "Karathi weapon charge spike," Amita called out, eyes moving too fast over her displays. "Energy density climbing. Mean their waveform is, it's like nothing in the archive." "Of course it is." Mi said she was already patching the live feed into the Auric-derived framework, forcing ancient algorithms to contort around a modern threat. "We're not asking for a perfect match. We're asking for a starting point." The cesium samplers in high orbit, small wafers of the exotic material mounted on drones, shimmered as latent patterns stirred within them. They were still far from the path of the main pulse, but even the ambient field of the charging weapon was enough to make their internal pulses itch. "Hadrian coil temperature at 60% of threshold," an engineer reported. "Time dilation field not yet engaged." Min looked at the countdown scattered across her displays. Time until full scythe discharge. Time until the leading edge reached Earth's orbit. Time needed to push the flux drive to the required field strength. The numbers were too close. "Amita," she said, "you have priority on all processing nodes. Steal whatever you need. If Tau goes dark under the load, we write it down together." Amita swallowed, nodded, and sank deeper into her work. On the far side of the system, the world lance hung in the velvet dark like a nightmare. Its primary arrays glowed faintly as fields coiled within them. Archstrategos Vexar floated in his command couch, feeling the faint throbbing of the ship's heart extend through the deck. Around him, subordinate officers watched their own displays. Frills taught, "Target coordinates confirmed," the ops subcommander said. "Terran homeworld locked. Surface alignment compensates for rotation, atmospheric refraction, and magnetospheric flux." "No ultimatum," Vexar said again, almost to himself. "No warning. We end this before they can make a story of it." He thought of the worlds in the archives, the ones that had made the mistake of being interesting. None of them had ever turned the scythe. None of them had even understood it before they died. "Fire on my mark," he said. 3. Far away, Diego's weld sizzled, molten metal blooming and freezing in quick flashes as he sealed the cesium panel's edge. 2. Amida's fingers blurred as she slammed routines into place, rewriting submarines the Auric had once used to tune their own phase structures. She felt as if she were composing music with a gun to her head, notes colliding and reforming in her mind. 1 at exactly 300 p.m., Terran Standard, in a system whose name the Cathy had never bothered to learn, the Starfall scythe fired. The beam was not light, though it carried light within it. It was not heat, though. Anything it touched became heat. It was something older, a ripple in the deep fabric that underlay all fields, coaxed into shape by obscene engineering. It crossed space faster than any human could comprehend. But still, it took time, long enough for sensors to register the launch, for maximum samplers to flare, for data to cascade down invisible channels to Tycho's humming cores. The first touch of it brushed the outer edge of Earth's magnetosphere. Auroras burst into life simultaneously at both poles, spiraling curtains of green and purple that lit nightside clouds with ghostly fire. Satellites in the upper band simply ceased to exist, their casings vaporized, their circuit boards turning to plasma. On the Astraeos Halarim, every Xium segment sang. Diego felt it as a pressure in his bones, a vibration that set his teeth on edge. The panel under his gloves flickered, its surface blooming with intricate interference patterns. For a heartbeat, he saw the reflection of the beam in it, a twisting, layered structure that made his eyes water. "Here it comes," his foreman whispered over the line, voice gone thin. In Tau, Amida's displays exploded with color. The waveform that hit the Cesium samplers was far more complex than any model she had run. It shifted not just in amplitude and phase, but in harmonics. That did not even map cleanly to human math. "Too many degrees of freedom," she gasped. "Then collapse them," Mean snapped. "We don't need to understand everything. We need a phase key that reduces the net transfer." Amida grabbed chunks of Auric code like handfuls of clay and rammed them together, forcing them through the live data stream. Conflict errors lit her peripheral displays like fireworks. She ignored them, focusing only on the emerging pattern, a ghost of the scythe's own song, inverted and wrapped around the Cesium's natural modes. "We have a candidate," she said, voice shaking. "It's ugly." "Ugly is fine," Mean said, broad. The returning pattern surged outward from Tau, racing along hard links and laser beams to every control hub on the Halarim. Ordinarily, it would have crept at light speed, always lagging behind the leading edge of the oncoming destruction. But as the pattern left Tau's antennas, the Hadrian flux drive screamed. The field it generated was not stable. Time did not slow uniformly around Earth. It wobbled, stretched, compressed in ripples that tore at causality like rough hands on fabric. Clocks on the moon and in orbit disagreed by microseconds, then milliseconds, then more. Some oscillated briefly, losing time before catching up in jittering leaps. Around the ring of the Estras Halarim, though the effect was coherent enough, the returning signal slid along the circle, not as electromagnetic radiation, but as a distortion riding the edge of the flux. Within the ring's reference, time thickened. The incoming beam's leading edge seemed to crawl, its murderous heart slamming toward the planet through syrup. The Cesium segments felt the pattern slap into them and changed, their internal lattices reconfigured, twisting into shapes that no human had ever seen, shapes that did not care about three-dimensional intuition. Where before they had been merely exotic mirrors, now they became a single world-wave guide tuned to the sire's essence. The main body of the beam reached them. At the exact point where the scythe's heart intersected the orbital plane, medium panels flared white, not with heat, though there was plenty of that, boiling off superstructures, scouring the faces of support frames, but with phase interaction. Instead of cutting straight through, the energy was caught, not stopped. Nothing could stop that. Caught like a river entering a perfectly shaped channel. It flowed around Earth at roughly 35,000 km altitude. The Astraeos Halarim lit up in a ring of indescribable brilliance. For observers on the night side, It looked as if someone had drawn a burning circle across the stars. In Mean's control room, variables spiked and flattened in dizzying waves. Segments 60 through 80 holding, an engineer shouted, but we're losing coherence in the 90s. Thermal overload, structural degradation. On the ring, Cesium panels exploded where the tuning had been off by even a fraction. Where Asium growth defects rushed installations or tiny miscalculations had left microscopic gaps. The scythe's energy found purchase panels flared, cracking from within, shards spinning away like shrapnel. Support trusses buckled and snapped. Gap forming at Sector G7, someone said projected beam leakage vector intersects Pacific and North American continental plate. Mean saw the projection, a lance of annihilation punching through the atmosphere, boiling the ocean, shearing through crust and mantle. She heard distant radios filling with panic. "Can we reroute around the gap?" she asked. "Not without losing containment," Amita said. Her voice was tight, eyes locked on the chaotic waveform. "If we deform the path this far into the transfer, we risk decoherence. The whole thing will spray." Spray? She meant the beam would scatter, dispersing enough to devastate across a hemisphere rather than carve a neat hole. On the Haller, Diego saw the gap. It was not a roar or a crack. It was simply absence. One moment, a row of faintly shining segments stretched along the curve. The next, there was a yawning darkness where a panel had been, supporting arms dangling. He did not think. Something deep in him, the same part that had made him run into burning stairwells and collapsing warehouses, took his hands and moved them. "Control, this is Salvatierre at E12, he barked. "I've got a panel and a line on that gap." "Negative," came the crisp reply. "All personnel clear to safe zones. We are at maximum exposure risk." "Your safe zones are down there?" Diego snapped, glancing at the blue-white swirl of Earth. "You lose this ring. There's nowhere to hide." The cases panel he had just finished aligning sat in its cradle, brackets still partially unlocked. Its surface was already glowing with weird inner light, phase modes dancing as it interacted with the learn pulse. Diego released its clamps. His tug drone anchored nearby chimed in protest as its control feed was overridden. He swung himself around, boots scraping, and slammed his mag-gloved hands onto the panel's frame. His tether lines spooled out. "Diego, what are you doing?" his foreman shouted. "Patch job," Diego grunted. His muscles burned as he hauled himself in the panel along the curve, using emergency thrusters on the panel's edge to give it momentum. "You needed a bridge. I'm bridging." The gap ahead widened in his visor, a black wound in the burning ring. Beyond it, he could see the oncoming invisible core of the scythe, only visible where it made the existing cases howl. He knew in a cold, clear way that the timing was impossible. He pushed anyway. In Tau. A sensor blip flagged on Amita's screen. "Mean," she said, barely audible. "We're getting manual interference on Sector G7. Someone's moving a panel." Mean's hands tightened. "Is it aligned?" "Not yet. Their local telemetry is numbers scrolled by. Amita did mental geometry at a speed she would later barely believe. If they get it in place within the next 2 seconds, we can push a micro-tuning burst." "That's not enough time for them to lock clamps," Mean said. "It doesn't have to be locked," Amita said almost fiercely. "It just has to be there." On the ring, Diego's world narrowed to the gap, and the numbers ticking down in the corner of his visor. His arms screamed, his suit served wind in sympathetic overload. He could feel the panel humming now, the strange extra-dimensional pressure of its interaction with the learning pulse bleeding into his bones. 10 memoarm, he gasped. 5. He kicked off the curve, using his body as a lever, swinging the panel's far edge into the gap. It caught one support arm, bounced, skidded, edges scraped against raw metal. His tether snapped taut, jerking him half a meter away. His chest harness creaked. Diego snarled raw and wordless, and fired his suit's micro-thrusters at full burn, slamming his chest into the back of the panel. The impact knocked the breath from him. His ribs flared with pain. The panel lurched forward, its far edge catching between two dangling brackets. For a heartbeat, it hung there, not quite in line, not quite out. Then gravity's whisper caught it. It sagged a centimeter into place. "Now," Amita whispered. Tau spat a tuning pulse down the line, a focused correction wave slipping through the chaos. It hit the panel just as the main body of the scythe slammed into the baller. At that point for Diego there was no sensation of heat. There was only light. It poured through him, around him, into the panel, and out again. A torrent of structured energy meeting a lattice just barely coherent enough to hold its shape. His mind filled with something like a chord, a harmonized scream, every note of his being vibrating with it. For one impossible stretch of microsecond sounds, he existed both as a human clinging to a piece of alien glass and as a transient pattern within the beam itself, riding its terrible coherence around the world. Then the panel overload tore itself and him apart. On Earth's surface, no one saw that. From the night side, they saw the ring. For an instant, it was brighter than the sun, a hair-thin circle of white fire encircling the sky. Shadows turned sharp under its glow. Oceans glinted like mirrors. Power grids groaned as induced currents surged through them, tripping breakers and melting transformers. In Home Guard Odin, Admiral Haddad gripped the edge of the central console, watching as sensor feeds tried desperately to keep up. "Containment," he demanded. "Partial loss at multiple sectors," a technician said, voice shaking. "But the main flow is staying in the ring. Leakage levels. Sir, we're still catastrophic." In Tau, Mean watched a different metric, coherence. As long as the scythe's internal ferocity stayed rolled into a single-phase wave, it could be bent. If it fragmented, it would spray patternless death across any exposed area. The line on her graph dipped, wobbled, then steadied. "It's holding," she whispered. "God help us, it's actually holding." The ring did not merely reflect the beam. It took the structure of the scythe, the precise relationship of its amplitudes, its harmonics, the shape of its push against space-time, and rolled it. The incoming vector's momentum was not reversed in a mirror bounce. It was gradually curved along the circular path defined by the Hauerum's orbit. "A waveguide," Amita had said. "A slide." The scythe, unthinking, unfulfilling, followed the path of least resistance. Around Earth it went, its path and arc of annihilation carefully kept just outside the atmosphere. Where the cesium ring was strong, the beam flowed smoothly. Where segments had failed and been patched, it bucked and snarled, but the overall coherence held. As it emerged from the far side of the ring, the tuning that Mean's team had rammed into gave it one final push. The World Lance had fired at Earth along a precise line. Now that line bent back in the Cathay flagship's command pit. Alarm icons bloomed across Vexar's display a fraction of a second before reality caught up. "Unexpected energy reflection," an analyst shouted. "Origin the target planet." "That is not possible." Vexar's sensory net showed it plainly. A beam signature nearly identical to the scythe zone incoming on a tight vector. "Impossible or not," he snapped. "We will revector emergency offset dump charge into local space if necessary." But the scythe was not a simple gun. Its output stage was an elaborate chain of ring arrays and condensates designed to form exactly one kind of pulse, a coherent planet-cutting lance. It could not fire at random. It could not easily be bled off. The energy was already committed. His crew scrambled, fields shifted, coils groaned. The massive ship tried to twist. Space did not care. The reflected beam, still singing with the pattern the Hauerum had given it, came straight for the World Lance's heart. It hit amidships. For an observer at a safe distance, the event would have been both beautiful and horrifying. The World Lance's hull flared. A flower of incandescent metal and plasma petals. Internal structures flashed into vapor and light. Wave fronts of sheer destructive interference raced through the vessel's length, shredding decks and caverns where the Karathi crew had believed themselves untouchable. In the flagship's command pit, the last thing Arch-Strategist Vexar saw was his own weapon signature spiking across his displays in a shape no model had ever produced. Then the pit and Vexar with it, ceased to exist. The beam did not stop at the flagship. It speared through, continuing along its warped path, its coherence fraying now that it had done the work the Halarum had set for it. Lesser ships in its path, cruisers, destroyers, supply craft, disintegrated, their hulls turning to fog in an instant. Those on the fringes were hurled away by the expanding shock front, systems overloaded, holes scarred. In orbit around Earth, the ring dimmed. The Kessium had done all it could. Segments cooled, their internal patterns collapsing back into calmer states. Places where panels had shattered glowed cherry red, radiating heat into space. Support girders hung broken. On Earth, the auroras faded slowly, curtains of color paling into the normal dark. In Homeguard Odin, no one spoke for a long moment. Admiral Haddad's legs felt strangely weak. He flexed his muscles, anchoring himself in the present. "Status," he said hoarsely. "World Lance gone," a sensor chief said, as if afraid the word would summon it back. "We're reading a debris cloud at the last known coordinates. Energy signature consistent with catastrophic internal failure, triggered by an external beam. Impact. Secondary Cathy vessels. Many destroyed, others heavily damaged. The surviving ships have their formations collapsing. No coordinated movement." He allowed himself one breath, then another. "Casualty assessment on our side?" he asked. "Outer system assets largely expended," came the quiet reply. "The Drift Ward Palisade is, sir. We've lost almost everyone there." Roman Dulca, he thought, and all the mad volunteers who had turned their ships into bullets and static. "And the ring?" he asked. "Istra Serum remains mostly intact," another officer said. "We've lost perhaps a quarter of the case segments outright. There are pockets of debris. Some support superstructure is compromised, but the main structure is still in orbit. It's still there, still neatly wrapped around the world." Ty leaned heavily on the console. In his peripheral display, he saw flashes, workers cheering and sobbing in makeshift shelters, children looking up at the burning ring with wide eyes, envoys on Valyri ships speaking rapidly into secure channels. He keyed a link to Tau. The line crackled. Dust modes floated through the background. One wall had a crack that hadn't been there before. Equipment sagged, some of it still sparking. Mean appeared in the main field, face stare with grime and sweat. Amida hovered behind her, hair loose, eyes huge. "You did it," TK said. "We did something," Mean said. Her voice was flat with exhaustion. "The world is still there. That counts." He wanted to say more. He wanted to tell them about the beam's path, about the way the World Lance had come apart, about Roman's last recorded transmission, a simple "give them hell for us" before his ship vanished from the net. Instead, another report flashed in the corner of his view. Cathy transmissions scattered and frantic, some begging for orders that would never come, others swearing revenge. He saw too the Valyri conflux channels lighting up. Selkin's name tagged across multiple secure streams. "Min," he said, "I need to know something. The Auric. Did they say anything about doing what we just did?" "They said we shouldn't," Emlyn said. She gestured weakly at a nearby terminal. Amida pulled a deeper layer from the reliquary cores when the flux drive hit that overdrive spike. "There are warnings." Amida stepped in, throat working. The Auric used similar phase reflections in their own wars. Every time they did, it sent a ripple through whatever medium they were tugging on. A kind of signature. A shout. "To who?" Trick asked. "To anyone who can hear," Amita said softly. "We just shouted very loudly." In the corner of her screen, a new pattern pulsed. Something the Auric cores had only hinted at before. A regular patient signal coming from far beyond, even where the reliquary had drifted. It had been faint before, lost in cosmic noise. When the scythe reflected, when the Hadrian drive twisted time and space into a knot, it had brightened as if answering. Tar stared at it. Sulkin's voice came from his other side. She had stepped closer to his console, eyes drawn to the same data. "The Imperium was your immediate problem," she said quietly. "This may be your next." He almost laughed. One nightmare at a time, envoy. He cut the system audio for a second, letting silence flood his ears. Below, on Earth, sirens still wailed in a dozen cities. Fires had started where power surges had overloaded old transformers. Planes had fallen from the sky when guidance systems glitched under the magnetic storm. People were pulling survivors from collapsed structures, sharing water, screaming, praying, celebrating. All of that would need him soon. For now, he reopened the outward channels and sent a single broadcast, tight-beamed and wideband both. To all Karathi vessels within the Sol system, he said, catching himself before he used the old comfortable name for their star. This is Admiral T.K. Haddad of Home Guard Odin. Your flagship has been destroyed by its own weapon. Your command structure is gone. Any ship that ceases hostile activity immediately and transmits intention to surrender will be allowed to retreat under escort. Any ship that continues to engage will be disabled or destroyed. He paused, then added, You came here to erase us. You failed because you assumed we would play by your rules. Do not make that mistake again. He sent the message. It flashed outward at light speed, past the drifting wreckage of a once invincible dreadnought, past the burning cores of shattered cruisers, washing over stunned Cathy crews who had no frame for what had just happened. Some of those ships would choose defiance and die. Some would surrender. Some would flee. The galaxy's story about humans, Tar knew, had just changed. He closed his eyes briefly, then turned back to his people. Get me casualty lists, he said. Then get me reconstruction teams. We held the line. Now we have to show we can hold what we kept. In the weeks that followed, the burning ring in the sky faded to a dim metallic arc. Earth's orbit became busy with rescue craft and salvage vessels, picking their way through the debris of shattered cesium panels and burnt-out drones. The remains of the Asteris Horum hung there like the skeleton of a dragon, broken in places but unmistakably present. On the moon, Tau Deepworks ran on backup systems while engineers in patched-together suits checked for stress fractures in its walls. The Hadrian flux drive lay cool and dark, its coils warped. Some of its core conductors melted into unrecognizable sculptures. It would never spin again. It had done its work. In a quiet observation dome carved into a surviving section of Tau, a small group gathered. Admiral Taraka stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the curve of Earth. Cracks of light showed where dawn chased night along its surface. Faint broken segments of the Haurim glinted as they caught the sun. Beside him, Dr. Minbekyu leaned on the railing. Fatigue settled deep into her bones. Amita Bhaskar sat on a crate nearby, tablet balanced on her knees, eyes flicking between lines of auric script and the slowly pulsing anomaly in the distant sky. Envoy Seelan stood a little apart, her translucent skin catching the faint glow of the dome's emergency lights. We will rebuild the ring, TK said. It was not a question. Well, rebuild something, Mine said, probably with a lot more testing before we feed it a planetary death ray next time. Amita huffed a laugh, quickly swallowed. And the echo? Tar asked, nodding toward her tablet. Amita tapped the display. The anomaly signal flared in miniature, a repeating pattern slow and unhurried, so faint that only the recent upheaval had brought it into focus. We've triangulated as best we can with existing arrays, she said. It's far. We don't have a label for that region. The Auric did. Their notes are poetic. They call it a place where the dark is denser than usual. Selchin's frills fluttered. That is not encouraging. It may be nothing, Mean said. A remnant, an automated system responding whenever it feels this kind of distortion. Or it may be someone knocking back, Tar said quietly. He suddenly felt the weight of years ahead. Negotiations with the conflux with frightened minor powers now realizing that their safe, predictable galaxy had just sprouted a new variable. Reconstruction on Earth, memorials for Roman, for Diego, for the hundreds of names already scrolling down the casualty lists. He also felt the strange, almost exhilarating chill of a horizon expanding too fast. We survived their greatest weapon. He said, "We turned it around. That story will spread whether we want to or not. And someone out there might decide they don't like that," Sulin said. "Then they can send their worst," Amita said suddenly, surprising herself. "We'll just have to get better." Min smiled, small and tired, but real. Tar let his gaze linger on the broken ring, on the world it had just shielded through an act of shared, reckless brilliance. Humans had taken a weapon meant to erase them and used it as a mirror, not by building something bigger, but by learning how to be in the right place with the right kind of risk at the worst possible moment. If the galaxy wanted to treat them as a singularity, perhaps it was time to see where that path led. "Get some rest," he said to me and Amita. "We'll need you again soon." They nodded, turning away from the window. He stayed a moment longer, watching as the first of the repair tugs moved toward a damaged segment of the howler-rim, floodlights cutting lances of brightness across its twisted struts. Somewhere in that tangle of metal and scorched cesium, a scrap of a suit hung fused to a panel, all that remained of a man who had shoved a mirror into the path of a star. Tar inclined his head very slightly. Then he turned back to the work of a world that had just taught the universe something new about what it meant to be human.